We had our first frost last night, and that means the growing season is over. So I need to lift and store my dahlias for winter. So in this video, I'm going to take you through the process of what I do to make sure I have some dahlias left over for next year. The first frost is normally the cue to start lifting your dahlias for storage. One frost will not kill the dahlia, particularly if it's quite light, as it was with us. Obviously, if we're going down -8, -9, and that's your first frost, then that might have a different effect. I often lift mine earlier than the first frost, just purely for convenience, because I need to dry them as well. And so if you leave it too late, the weather could be cold and damp, and so it makes it difficult for drying, which then impacts the storage. So I sometimes take the 1st of October as my go-to date to start lifting the dahlias. However, this year has been a bit slow and interesting, and so I was wanting to maximise the flowers that I had. So I've left it a little bit longer, but as long as the tubers have been in the ground for about 120 days, so that's 4 months, give or take, then the tubers should have had enough time to grow, gain enough storage, nutrition in the tubers to keep them alive throughout the winter. So once the dahlias have been in for 120 days, you can lift them at any point. So for me, if I'm planting them out in June, well, I start them off in March actually, but if I'm planting them out in June, then we've got 4 months is the end of September, so that's my cut-off. So don't panic if your dahlias get hit by frost. To store dahlias, I have always stored them out of the ground. I've never really had much success keeping them in the ground and covering them with mulch. I tend to lift them. Now, saying that, I haven't tried since I've had this cutting patch to leave them in the ground. So I am going to leave a few, I think. I have some caffeolets over there, which I have a few tubers of caffeolate around the place. So if they get lost, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to experiment with leaving those in the ground, and everything else in this bed is getting lifted and stored away. And the first step of storing the dahlias is to cut back all the growth. So I am going to harvest the flowers, harvest any seed heads, and then cut everything back. So let's get cutting. So the first step in storing your dahlias is harvesting what you want to keep. So I might keep that flower, but most of the flowers on this bush are frost damaged, so they will go on the compost. Same with, unfortunately, the labyrinth. They seem to be frost damaged, so again they will be going predominantly on the compost heap. This is labyrinth two-tone. It's turned a very strange colour now. It's kind of a green. It looks ill. So that will be going on the compost. But this here, if you can see it, is a seed pod that the fluid is not coming out of, and it feels solid inside. So that is a good seed pod to save and see whether we get anything interesting next year. So I will be going through all of the flowers, see what's worth picking and taking it from there. I've discovered that it is easier to deal with one plant at a time. So by all means, pick the flowers, pick the seed heads, but then just go in and cut the flowers, cut down the stems to about 6 inches off the ground, so you can still see where the plant is, but then it's giving you enough room to dig it out. So let's cut back this sweet Natalie and we'll take it from there. So now we've cleared the dahlia tuber area, and it's time to dig up the tuber. So I'm going to start from quite a way back so I don't risk damaging the tuber, and that by doing that it lifts it, but you're nowhere near. So let's go a little bit closer. There we go. And there is the tuber. Let's knock off some of the earth because we certainly don't need all that with us. So this was a first year tuber, and it probably started life as one that sort of size. And look how much it's grown in a year. And I think what I'm going to do is split it before I pack them away, but I'll see how well they dry. So I'm going to put that somewhere safe. So I have now cleared the dahlia bed of dahlias. There is other stuff in here, but I'm not that bothered whether the frost gets it or not. All of the beds need a good clear out. But what I wanted to do was make sure that the things that I wanted to protect were protected. So the dahlias are dug out and stored or put outside inside to dry. I'll show you that in a minute. The cafe au lait bed I have covered with the dahlia's own clippings and some hay for now. I have ordered some strulch so that I'm going to put a thick layer of that on, and I'm going to get some compost from the compost bins to put on, but I'm not going to do that today because I don't think I've got time, and I'll do that when I clear this bed. We are supposed to have another frost tonight, but then it's starting to warm up, so as long as they're okay for tonight, we should be okay. Let me show you what I've done with the dahlias. All of the dahlias have been put in their own boxes with labels and are just here for the next couple of days to dry out, and hopefully that means that the soil can be knocked off easily. As you can see, some of these dahlias have grown enormously. For example, that was just a small tuber this year. Look at it now, it's massive. Now then, disease. I have had 2 casualties of gall. Let me show you that. So these are my gall casualties. This one is a definite. As you can see, everything's fused together. So a lot of new growth that looks as if they could be stems, but they're just fused together. And that is a sure sign of gall. This one is, I think, it was an unknown, it didn't flower, and I believe it is a red labyrinth. This one is American Dawn. So there was 2 plants, and this was one of them. Now, yeah, so if we look again in there, fused, so it is definitely gall. So they have to be disposed of in the bin, and they've not to go in the compost. And what that means is the virus could also be in the soil. So having that gall in the bed is just a bit of a pain now. So it means these 2 beds are out of action for dahlias for the next few years. Fortunately, I have enough beds that I can move them around. But this is the problem, there is so much gall coming in from overseas suppliers. But as it stands, the virus should go. I need to investigate a bit more, but it should dissipate out after I'll be putting compost in, put other plants in. It's not going to affect any other plant. It's a Dahlia virus, and so that should be fine for other plants to put in. And I'll be using the other beds, the dahlias, next year. So I will leave the tubers to dry out for a couple of days, and I will, once I can knock off a bit more soil, I'm going to have a look at splitting them this year before I store them, because they're quite big tubers now. For it being quite a rubbish year for weather-wise and everything, they've really put on a lot of growth in the tuber department, and so storage of such big tubers is quite tricky. So I am going to try and cut them down into smaller tubers later, so I will just need a couple of days to let them dry off a bit. So it's been 5 days since I dug up the tubers, and this morning, as it was a rainy day, I thought I would come in here and just check to see how they've been drying, knock off a bit of the soil and see where we are, whether anything's worth splitting. I'm glad that I took a look, because I have got 3 further examples of gall, which is gutting. So the Holly Hill Dog Beauty has the leafy gall. The Night Silence, which is both of those have only just started flowering, has also got leafy gall. They are probably something that I will buy again or try again, or something similar. And also Peaches, I think, has got crown gall. Within the root there is something that looks just a bit strange. And as I'm not that bothered about the dahlia, I am just going to put it in the bin. Let's not worry risking infecting anything else, and be done with it. So in the bottom shelf, I have the dahlias that are already of an appropriate size. So they're either self-split, or I don't want to cut them any smaller. The ones that I've taken out here on to the workbench are the ones that I think I'm going to make an attempt at splitting, mainly because of the size. So I am going to start with Molly Raven, and the reason I am going to do that is that I think it should be just a nice easy cut. If you can see, so here we have an eye on this bulb here, and we also have a collection of eyes there and there. So if I do nothing else and just cut down the middle, taking what I can, there should be at least 2 tubers that I can create out of that. Whilst I'm cutting it, in order to prevent infection, I make sure my tools are clean with a mixture of bleach and water, really. So that's already been cleaned. So all we're wanting to do is split it down the middle somehow. So it's quite a meaty centre. So I am just gonna, oh, there we go. And a little bit of an attack and a pull, and we've got a leg there that's wanting to split, and that's it. So I'm going to leave that to cure over for the next few days. Same with this one here. This had a broken tuber. Let me get my secateurs. Clip that off, we don't need it. Put that on the compost. Any more damaged, cut that back. It's another one there, and then this one I'm going to cut off the tail of it because we don't need all of that. And once it stops raining, I am actually going to cut this stem off there. We don't need it as long as that. But that's Molly Raven done. So we have now got 3 tubers that I can reuse. Let's just give everything a bit of a wash. Now then, this one here is fine. It seems to have got itself into a pickle, and so I think I can cut in there. So if you can see, the stems are growing from underneath the tuber. So I think if I can cut in there, then at least it would separate that out and create a better structured tuber. So let's give that one a go. Let's go in from there. There we go. Tend to, when they want to break apart, they tend to just quite easily slip over. I'm just having a quick look to make sure there's nothing odd. I think that there, whilst it looks strange, I think it's because of too much water and not anything to do with crown gall. They're just nodules because of too much water. So I'm going to hope that is the case. Trim off the roots. Don't need all this wiry stuff. And then again, I'm going to cut off these finer roots. Trim down the stem a bit more and leave that to cure for a few more days so that the broken stem will harden off. So I will carry on doing this splitting. I just wanted to show you there is no point storing a tuber that is broken like that. It's not going to do anything for the tuber, so may as well split it off and leave it from there. Cut back the stem a bit more, leave it to dry. So I'm going to crack on and get that done, and I'll show you. I'll return once everything's ready to get stored. I just got for the first tray, and this one was loose in the tray. Now this is not gonna do anything next year. It is a tuber, but it has not got any eyes at the top. So again, no point storing that. So we're at probably about the 10th day since I dug up the tubers. The tubers where they were cut have sealed up and they are ready to be packaged. Now when I was cutting the tubers, you might have thought that I was being a bit brutal, but in reality most of those tubers that you saw were first year growths. So the tubers that I have ended up with were significantly larger than the tubers that I started off with, and even the tubers that I've now cut down it to are larger than the tuber size that I started off with. So it may have been brutal, but worst case scenario, I only need one of the new tubers or the split tubers to work, to make it through the winter and grow. And I am then in no worse position than I was at the start of this year. In reality, some of those tubers have been split into 2, 3, 4 additional tubers. So I have got so many extra options. So if one fails, then I have got multiple other tubers to have a go at to make, and see whether they work or not. I actually haven't got enough room for the number of tubers that I've created, but let's get through the winter first before we tackle that problem. So breaking them down into smaller tubers this year for me, I don't normally do it at this time, but this time I just felt the need to do it this time, because when you saw the size of that two-tone tuber, it was massive. This is where we have ended up. So it has now been split into 4 tubers now. Now I would guess, and it is a guess, I can't remember, the original tuber was about that sort of size. So I have got 3 other tubers that are significantly larger. So hopefully, as long as one of these tubers come through, then I am okay and good to go next year. So let's get ready to box. I have a selection of stacking trays to box them in. I also, if I have got too many to fit in those boxes, I have some cardboard boxes that I'm going to put them in. But we'll wait and see. Hopefully they can all fit in these crates. They've got aeration in them. They're solid and sturdy. And hopefully, well, I've used them the last few years. They've been really good for storage. So they can all stack on top of each other. So it's much neater space once they're in. Now my plan this year is to have layers of the tubers. Now that they're smaller, last year I seemed to have the tubers variety, 1 per box. This year I've got quite a few more varieties. So I think I'm going to try and do layers and then see how we get on from there. So I have a mixture of spent compost and pet bedding, so wood chip type pet bedding, or it's actually horse bedding that I've had for ages. I used it last year, and I've mixed it up, more of the horse bedding than the compost, but what we're trying to do is wick away any water that is on the tuber. They need to be kept a little bit damp, but predominantly dry, and they most definitely don't want to be kept wet because they'll then just rot. But if they dry out too much, it might go to the other extreme. So you kind of want to keep it surrounded by some sort of moisture, tiny bit, but in general on the drier side. So I have this mixture, so let me get started and I'll show you. So we'll put just a thin layer of the material in the bottom to give a bit of protection there, and then I'm going to layer the tubers. Now they are strange sizes, so you need to be careful. But what I'm trying to do is not have them touching each other, just in case one of them thinks about rotting. Then if they're not touching, then they won't affect the other tuber. So that's about all we can get in that level. So let's cover that up with a bit more so that they're covered. Put in the label, and then what I'm going to do is cover with some cardboard and then start the process again. Now, because cardboard is also a wicking material and we have the tubers covered from that side, then I can put the next set of tubers on top of there. As you're putting them in, just check for squishiness. They should be firm. Anything that's squishy could be an initial sign of rot that you don't want to be happening. So that's a big one. So somehow rearrange the tubers so they touch as the minimum amount as possible. Right, so that's that. So I'm just going to cover that, put the label in, and I'm actually going to put a piece of cardboard on top of that too. Just so we have a clear cut off, and that's it. Essentially, all of the tubers will be packed away like that. So let me finish with that, and I'll get back to you when it's all done. So I am done. There we have it. I have managed to fit all of my tubers into the 4 stacking crates. So that's brilliant. So they will find a home in an outbuilding that we have here that is dry and cool. And that is the main thing. There is any number of ways that you can store dahlias. And it really depends on your environment. What you want to ensure is that they are relatively cool and dry. So, depending on your climate, you may have cooler weather than we have here in the UK. You might have drier weather than we have in the UK. For us, it doesn't get too cold, but it does get quite humid or damp, shall we say. So the key thing here for us is to avoid rotting by keeping the moisture out. The cold, as long as it's in a building somewhere, you can probably keep it frost-free, and that's what you want. But you don't want to keep it too warm. You don't want them to be sprouting or starting to regrow whilst they're in storage. So you want them to be at a fairly cool temperature. I was going to say ambient, but cool temperature until you're ready to take them out of storage next March, April time. That's it for storing dahlias. It's over and done with now for the season. Time to have a rest, for them to have a rest, and we kick it all off again next March. So until the next time, happy gardening.